Well, hello and welcome to this week's Photographic Life. There can be few of you listening to this podcast, and specifically if you are over the age of 50, that cannot visualise one of the most distressing images to have come out of the Vietnam War. The image from a road in the village of Trang Bang, Vietnam, of a naked girl fleeing a napalm attack has always been credited to Nick Ut, a photographer who worked for the Associated Press at the time. In the decades since, Ut has repeatedly talked publicly, in interviews and elsewhere, about his role in capturing the photo and his later friendship with its subject, Kim Phuc Phan Thi. Yet a documentary that premiered earlier this year titled The Stringer set off investigations into the creator of the image. The film argues that a freelance photographer took the image and that an Associated Press photo editor misattributed it to Ut. The World Press Photo Foundation weighed in and said that a months-long investigation had found that two other photojournalists may have been better positioned to take the photograph that Nick Ut had taken, and that it was suspending his credit for the image. That means the credit and caption in its online archives would be updated to include the doubts raised by its investigation. Although they did not take back the award they had given the image previously. Ut's lawyer, James Hornstein, has repeatedly disputed, the film's claims and called them defamatory. He said in a statement that the World Press photo decision was deplorable and unprofessional, and reveals how low the organisation has fallen. Many other voices in the photo community have also been vocal in speaking out against the film and how the story has been handled. The Stringer, directed by Bao Nguyen, enlisted several witnesses to argue that Nai sold the photo to Saigon Bureau photo chief Horst Fass for $20 in a print, including their brother, who claims he brought the film to the AP. Nai's daughter, Janine, Carl Robinson, a long-time AP photo editor in Saigon, who first contacted the filmmakers, and several of Robinson's former photojournalist colleagues have all contributed. The investigators also consulted forensic experts with the French NGO Index, who found it highly unlikely that Ut took the photo based on the other AP images credited to him that day. Now, I am not an expert on any of this, and therefore I will not share my feelings. But two photographers I do respect have recently taken to social media to put forward their informed thoughts. So I thought I would share these with you, so that you have a base from which you could explore this controversy if you wish, and what for me are the bigger issues it raises for photographic attribution. So the first contribution I want to read from, and I'm going to do this absolutely word for word, is a great photographer. Many of you again will know of his work and his career, and it's Dave Burnett. So Dave wrote this on Facebook, actually. This week's announcement by World Press Photo that they are suspending Nick Ut's credit for the Napalm Girl photograph, the now famous picture of young Vietnamese children running for safety, presents what feels like a whole new level of irrelevancy to what was once a powerful, honest guardian, an arbiter of photojournalism. As discussions grew over the winter about a new documentary film which claimed to reveal who really took that now famous photograph, there has been a terrible and unfortunate swirl of confidence in journalism itself. I would point out that while I declined to be interviewed in a film whose purpose was quite clear at the outset, neither have I been offered a chance to see and view the final version of the film on my own. The filmmakers, having carefully reached out to groups like World Press Photo during the early marketing phase of the film, which was eventually shown at the Sundance Festival in Park City, doubts and discussions began to arise in some quarters about who took the picture. 4 months ago, I was the recipient of a note from Jumana El-Khoury, the current executive director of World Press Photo, whose Press Photo of the Year prize I was awarded in 1980 and on whose jury I have served several times, twice as jury chair, advising me on January the 15th that they felt a need to find out more information about the true authorship of the photograph, and that they needed to hear from me by January 20th in order to take your statement into account of our decision. My response was to question what kind of journalistic principles would lead them to feel that a decision about a situation that was 53 years on had to be finalised in 5 days. I was aware of their supposed determination to create their own research and come up with an answer. Yet since January, I have not heard a single word from WPP, and I have come to understand that they have not reached out to Nick Ut or his representatives either in that time. We two, Nick and I, are among the very few still living who were in the press corps that day in Trang Bang. And while in the heat of the moment, no one spends conscious time monitoring what others do around them in a breaking news situation, no, we are, as photographers, trying to make pictures which tell that day's story, my memory is very clear, as it remains on many indelible aspects of my time in Vietnam, on that day of many crucial things. I have previously written on my experience that day and have not wavered my story in all these years. When it became obvious that a stream of civilians were running away from the village centre towards the road on which the press corps was haphazardly assembled, Nick Ut and Newsweek stringer Alex Shimkin, who were standing next to me, began racing down the road towards the oncoming children. In those next few moments, as the children neared, Nick Ut made that picture. In my recollection, no one else was even remotely in a place to take that picture. Later, at the Associated Press office, I had my film processed, edited and printed by the AP darkroom crew and sent pictures to the New York Times. In those minutes of waiting for the prints to be done, the AP darkroom chief emerged with the first ever 5x7 print of what would become known as the horror of war. There was never a moment when I doubted that Nick had made that picture, and while in one of my conversations with film producer Gary Knight, he said he had proof that Nick couldn't have taken the picture, I responded by saying, based on my recall of how Nick had run down the road ahead of everyone else, that no one but Nick could have taken that picture. I still haven't seen the film The Stringer, which strikes me as very uncollegial, since Gary called me several years ago to talk about Trang Bang and asked to see my pictures of that very day, early on in his narrative, before it became clear to me that he was attempting to show that another photographer had made the picture. I would like to see their analysis, but some things are very clear to me, and one of those is that in a desire to become part of the cabal which is embracing this film, World Press Photo is stumbling over its own journalistic shoes as it struggles to remain relevant and of interest in the wake of their own egregious ethical and intellectual lapses. David Burnett, New York, May 17th, 2025. There's a lot in there, isn't there, to pick up on, but the fact that he was there at the time, I think provides compelling evidence. Anyway, I'm going to follow up with a second statement, which has been given by the photographer Ed Wu, similarly on Facebook. Ed says this: I have stayed quiet on the Stringer because I wasn't there that day, and I'm not an authority on the specifics of Vietnam. But seeing how the Seven Foundation, I should say Gary Knight is part of the Seven Foundation, and some of the film's defenders have framed this as a moral reckoning while controlling access and deflecting critique, I feel the need to speak on the entire approach. I thought of this specifically when I read Sarah Terry's response to Pete Souza's post about Dave Burnett. As someone who is both a photojournalist and documentary filmmaker, I must point out the hypocrisies in Seven's argument, because the response is quite revealing about the industry. I know how documentaries move through the festival circuit before being widely available and need to pick up distribution. That is standard practice, but what is happening here goes beyond that. The filmmakers, Gary M. Knight, Seven, and the entire team behind this from day one, have tightly controlled who gets to see it, while dismissing anyone who hasn't seen it as uninformed. Even Nick Ut himself, whose legacy is directly at stake, reportedly has not been able to see the film. That is not transparency, but clearly strategic and selective access. If this project is righting a historical wrong, if it is truly about truth, then why the embargoes, NDAs, selective screenings? Why are there some people given advance copies to review and defend the film, but others are asked to withhold judgment? Why present something so consequential in such a limited and curated way? And insist that those who haven't seen it stay silent, while someone's legacy is being slowly dismantled and questioned. You could argue this is how documentary world works. But then let's be honest, why did Seven choose that route? Why not release these findings through a major investigation in a news outlet, or go with a public broadcaster, or share the full evidence in another forum? Why not secure a deal in advance with a streamer, as opposed to rolling the dice on the festival circuit and hoping it gets picked up, creating controversy and question, but no pathway for a satisfying airing of the basic facts? The decision to go the film festival route, starting with Sundance, was clearly about prestige and the pursuit or hope of profit. This wasn't about care for Nick Ut. This wasn't about creating space for a public reckoning, and certainly not about making the work accessible. You can't claim to dismantle colonial legacies while replicating their exact mechanics through an outdated film festival model that emphasises exclusivity. If the goal was justice, as the Stringers team claims, the process should have looked very different, and that is an active choice on Seven and Gary Knight's part. Seven and the team want it both ways, to hold the weight and moral clarity of investigative journalism, while hiding behind the entertainment industry playbook to control timing, tone and access. You cannot claim to be decolonising the field while using a deeply exclusive and commercial platform to do so. That contradiction is glaring, and it is precisely what is making me and so many of us uncomfortable. It feels like Gary Knight, Seven and others are patting themselves on the back, laundering their complicity and long-standing benefit from the very systems they now claim to repair by making a spectacle out of fixing a peripheral problem. In doing so, they seem to believe they've inoculated themselves from engaging with the far deeper structural changes this industry urgently needs. Because, from where many of us stand, it is still Gary Knight, Seven and their institutional allies, the very people who have long held the platform and microphone, now positioning themselves as the righteous correctors of history. Excuse me. I recognise the film was directed by Bao Nguyen, a Vietnamese-American filmmaker. That does matter, but it also doesn't exempt the project from critique, especially when his identity is used to shield the film from these very basic questions. Bao is not a photojournalist, and he has not waded into the granularity of the claims made by David Burnett and others. Can he speak for this very specific world of us having these internal, complex conversations within photojournalism? And I think it's fair to ask, how much editorial control did he have? Did he determine how Nick Ut would be portrayed? Who would be interviewed? Was he part of the decision to block Nick from viewing it? Could he have pushed back on the requirement of NDAs? Can we learn more about who actually shared decision-making power, Seven, Gary Knight, the other producers and him? Or is Bao being held up now as a symbolic safeguard against critique that ultimately is about long-standing institutional power? If the goal is transparency, this entire rollout has felt incredibly opaque. This feels deeply familiar. When white-led institutions use the language of decolonizing or righting the wrongs of the majority world to reassert control over the narrative, while BIPOC voices who push back are dismissed as angry, emotional, or making it too personal. And yet this is personal. Nick Ut means something to us as Asian photojournalists and people of colour, And I say us with hesitation, knowing full well that it risks being read as tribal. I have spent my entire career trying not to be tokenized, not to be boxed in by my identity, trying instead to let my work speak for itself. But the truth is, we didn't create that divide or distinction. I never defined myself or my work as an Asian photographer, but the industry did that to me, whether I asked for it or not. The historically white majority structure of this field creates those boxes and still sustains those very inequities. Whether or not Nguyen took the photo, Nguyen Tan Nai, I should say, took the photo, the conversation unfolding now reminds us of how little space there ever was and still is for Asian and other BIPOC photojournalists. That even our few icons, the rare exceptions like Nick Ut, are not safe from having their legacy publicly dismantled without process or care, like in this case, and even more condescendingly framed as a selfless pursuit of truth and justice. To say this investigation isn't a direct attack on Nick Ut's character, that they never set out to make him look bad or question his character, is incredibly patronising and disingenuous. To pretend it's not personal while his name and legacy are being re-evaluated without his participation or ability to defend himself is to ignore the power dynamics at play and to infantilize the very emotional weight this carries for many of us. Even if Nai took the photo, it only underscores how there was and is room for just one Asian photographer to be granted authorship and acclaim in a war largely told by white eyes. That isn't empowering, it's devastating. It's the same colonial logic that defined the war itself, a US-led campaign justified in the name of freedom, but structured to erase local voices, even in how the story was told. That dynamic hasn't changed nearly as much as we would like to think. I see it now in how this documentary has been rolled out. I see it in the discourse around it. I see this still in the industry. No matter how much we want to think things have gotten better, I am not saying the questions of who took this photo shouldn't be posed. And if Nai did indeed take the photo, that is a separate discussion to the point I am trying to make. But at this current moment, I need to highlight how the attitude towards Nick Ut, Seven's entire approach, is its form of exclusion, erasure and bias, insidiously hiding behind a professional tone. When white professionals preface their reflections with, "We need to reckon with colonialism," and then proceed to discredit BIPOC peers raising questions or go after Nick Ut, firmly throwing his credibility into question, without giving him the tools to even defend himself, that's not accountability, that's rhetorical insulation. I haven't seen the film, I haven't been able to. I hope the points I raised here won't be dismissed with just wait until you've seen it. Because what I'm pointing to is a much broader structural issue, one that exists regardless of what is in the documentary and the ultimate truth of who pressed the shutter. This isn't about protecting Nick Ut from critique. It's about asking whether this version of critique actually makes space for the justice supporters of this film are claiming, or just reinforces the same old structures in a new vocabulary. And that question, not just the photo's authorship, is what we should also be asking right now. A slightly extended episode this week because I thought it was really important to include those contributions, I suppose, those viewpoints concerning the Nick Ut story. But I also wanted to include some of your letters, which I always seem to run out of time to do. But this week I'm going to add some time to do that because the recent conversation that Bill Shapiro and I had concerning landscape photography certainly seemed to fire you guys up. And we received an awful lot of letters and comments. And here are just a few of them. Hello, Grant. I've just watched your landscape vlog, must be a YouTube listener, watcher, and found it very interesting, especially as it started condemning landscape photography and then developed into discussing the sort of reasons why I am a landscape photographer. Interesting enough for me to take you up on your request for comments. I am primarily a landscape and wildlife photographer, but I find most landscape photographs to be incredibly uninteresting. I suspect largely driven by YouTube and online photography forums. My experience of photography forums is that YouTube seems to have become the authority, and although there are some very good channels on YouTube, these aren't the popular ones. I have a possibly unfair view of separating landscape photographers from people who photograph landscapes, and when looking at landscape photographs, I am looking for, albeit subconsciously, the hand of the photographer. What do these photographs say about the photographer's relationship with the landscape and nature? Do I feel an empathy with the photographer through their photographs? Do they see the world as I see it, or are they showing me something new or different about a world I feel I know rather well? Am I inspired to find out more about the photographer? Where can I see more of their photographs? Do they have any books? And yes, I admit it, what are their technical practices? The now popular approach of producing photographically enhanced reproductions of pretty scenes leaves me cold. My own landscape pictures are a way of affirming and strengthening that connection. At least this is my explanation to myself as to why I make landscape photographs. I find capturing the spiritual connection of a photograph to be extremely difficult, and I inevitably spend a lot of time in processing digital, trying to reproduce the feelings that triggered me wanting to make the photograph. An important part of making the photograph is the experience of taking it, where the photographic process of studying the subject, thinking about its relationship to its surroundings, composition, and even technical things like choice of aperture, and where to focus deepens the experience. Indeed, for me, it's the experience of taking and processing the photographs that is important. I don't feel any particular need to share my photographs, though a bit of me feels I should. And that person goes on to say, because it's quite a long message, I think I've said enough, more than enough, in fact, so we'll stop now. I hope some of this is useful. Cheers, Graham. Well, thank you very much, Graham. Another email came in. Good morning, Grant. I apologise for the lack of nuance, which I wrote my feedback to the podcast episode that you published today about landscape photography. I've now deleted it as I decided to give you the longer form feedback that the integrity of your excellent podcast deserves. I think we all put something up on social media occasionally, don't we? And we think, oh, maybe I was a bit flip there. Shouldn't have said that. But anyway, quite a long and informed letter coming through here. But the basic premise of it is that the challenge bit, he's broken it down to different sections, but there's a section here on the challenges. Is sometimes the challenge is potentially not taking a photograph at all. I can drive or walk past a potential photograph many times before I have decided that there is something there that has some form of uniqueness on offer. Being discerning is key for me. The best photographs are the instinctive ones, though. Much like documentary photography, and probably all other forms of photography, the instinct is where all the magic happens. If I have to think about it too much, it usually means that I should let it go, and going back once again to that pale ale, he uses a reference of a pub earlier in the letter. I take photographs of grain silos in northern Italy, where I live. There is a story for me in those agricultural skyscrapers that are both anonymous and omnipresent. Anyway, so, thank you. I think that your podcast demonstrates that we should be able to publish opinions and point of view in order to provoke further discussion. I quite agree, whilst also not needing to be fully informed or taking a hard position. That's from somebody called Paul. And another letter, a short one here, a rather formal one, actually. We don't need to be formal when writing to me. But anyway, it starts off, hello, Mr. Scott. I've just listened to your episode about landscape photography, and since I'm not on any of the social media platforms, decided to contribute my 2 cents here. I'm not a landscape photographer per se, but I have photographed the landscape for many years. The impetus to do so is more about the time spent away from the hustle and bustle of daily life, more so than the images that result. It is the time spent alone, exploring nature and being in the moment that is the ultimate goal. That said, I have seen silver prints by Ansel Adams and John Sexton that are almost a spiritual experience looking at them. The same may be said of some of Michael Kenner's best work. I quite enjoy your and Mr. Shapiro's conversation. Only quite enjoy. I'm damning with faint praise there. But anyway, and wish you the best and hope you continue. Best, Michael Morris. So thank you very much for all of the letters we received. That was just a tiny snippet there of what gets sent to me. And a lot of the letters are really long and really informative and involved. So do please keep those coming. You know how to get hold of me. Just email me directly through unitednationsofphotography.com. As I said, slightly longer episode this week, but there's a lot to say. You got to say it. And of course, the other thing you've got to do, you've got to take care.